My manipulative brother was stealing from our dying mom, so I exposed him and she kicked him out. He returned to steal from her again, so this time I called the cops, and that's when my mom revealed a disgusting secret about him. My mother was dying from lung cancer, and I remember walking in on my brother stealing her opioid patches which she needed for pain relief. I demanded to know what he was doing, and although he denied it at first, I kept pressing him until it eventually got too much for him, and he blurted out, "Fine, I am stealing them. And guess what? I do it every night. Each time she goes to bed, I walk in, kiss her forehead and say goodnight, mommy, then reach under her bed and steal a few more. Is that what you wanted to hear?" But that wasn't it. He even went as far as convincing our mom that she was misplacing her patches and helped her look for them. I asked him why, and he explained that he's selling them, as apparently he owes money to some really bad people. His logic was that mom will die anyway, so he may as well save his own life. According to him, it's what she would want. That was the moment I lost it and began yelling. I called him pathetic, a coward, a disgusting excuse for a son, and that's when the door swung open and our mom walked in. She looked weak and frail, and I knew that the truth would crush her at that moment. She started asking what was happening relentlessly. I stayed silent, but she demanded that I tell her. I looked around and quietly told her that Jake was stealing her patches and planned to sell them for money. The look on her face hurt my heart. I'll never forget it. Tears began to fill her eyes, and she looked at Jake, who was staring at the floor, ashamed. She asked him if it was true, and he stood there and nodded. He tried to explain himself. He mentioned that he was in deep and scared, but I didn't know what he meant. Deep in what? I watched as her heart broke right in front of me. She shook her head, and tears streamed down her face. There's a long silence. Jake doesn't have an answer. He stood there, looking like a little kid who got caught doing something wrong. Mom eventually went back to the living room, but not before giving Jake one last look of disappointment. I was too angry to feel sorry for him. I couldn't believe he would do something like this. The next few days, Jake and I barely spoke to each other, and when we did, it was cold and awkward. I was ticked off at him, and the more I thought about it, the more I realized there had to be more to the story. Jake had always been a screw-up, but this was a new low, even for him. So, I start digging around, trying to figure out what's really going on. Jake had always been the kind of person who could charm his way out of anything. He was the life of the party, but charm could only get you so far. I found out he'd been spending a lot of time at a casino about an hour away from here. At first, I thought maybe he was just going there to blow off some steam, but then I found out he was gambling, a lot. He wasn't just in a little bit of debt. He owed thousands of dollars to people who hung around the casino. I guess they were loan sharks. I knew they wouldn't just let him walk away if he didn't pay up. I then checked Mom's accounts and saw large lump sums of money had been withdrawn. I checked who the recipient was, and it was in black and white. My brother was not only taking her pain medicine, but he was also siphoning money out of her account to fund his addiction when she was already struggling to pay her medical bills. She was always in and out of appointments to treat her cancer, and the co-payments were slowing but surely draining her account, especially now that she couldn't work anymore. I had to talk to Jake. I couldn't let him keep getting away with this, no matter what his reasoning was. When I confronted him about it, I did it in the kitchen late one night because I knew he was a big snacker. I cornered him while he was making a sandwich. I told him that we needed to talk and told him everything I knew. Jake froze and dropped the knife he was holding onto the counter. For a second, I thought he was going to deny everything, but then he confessed. It was like all the fight had gone out of him. After spilling everything, he apologized. He said he didn't mean for it to get this bad and thought he could handle his addiction, and now he didn't know what to do. He told me that they would end him if he didn't get them their money by next month. He slumped down into one of the chairs at the kitchen table and buried his face in his hands. I just stood there and stared at him. I wanted to feel sorry for him, but I couldn't. Not after what he did to Mom. I told him that he needed to leave. He couldn't stay here and keep stealing from Mom. Jake didn't argue. He just nodded, looking defeated. He packed up his things and left, and for a moment, I felt a small sense of relief. At least he wasn't here to cause any more trouble. But that relief didn't last long. Mom's health started getting worse. The cancer was spreading, and the patches weren't enough to keep the pain away anymore. She was in constant agony, and there was nothing I could do to help her. It crushed me watching her suffer like this. She asked me to forgive Jake, but I couldn't. Every time I thought about what he did, it made my blood boil. I tried to focus on taking care of Mom, but it was hard. The anger messed with my sanity. A few days later, I heard a noise in the house. It was late, and everyone should have been asleep. I got up and went to check, and I found Jake running around the house and throwing things in a bag. He threw any electronics he could find and all our valuables in his sack. After he rummaged through my stuff, he tried to steal more of Mom's things, jewelry, cash, anything he could get his hands on. I saw red. I grabbed him by the arm and yanked him away from the dresser. I yelled at him, and he said he was sorry and begged for one more chance. He said he needed the money that night, or he would be done for. I didn't care. I told him that I would call the police. He begged that I didn't, and said that the people he owned would come for us if I did. I almost believed him, but reached for my phone and dialed anyway. But before I can hit call, Mom's voice echoed down the hall. She used all the strength in her body to tell us to stop. She stood there, barely able to keep herself upright, her face twisted in pain. Seeing her like that, knowing how much she's suffering, broke something inside me. I had to protect her. I called the police, and they came and took Jake away. As they're dragging him out, he looks at me betrayed. With Jake in jail, the house was quieter. Mom's condition felt like it was getting worse by the day. The doctors said there was nothing more they could do. I could see she was hanging on by a thread, and all I could do was try to make her as comfortable as possible. One afternoon, as I sat by Mom's bed, she said she wanted to spend a day together, just the two of us. I was surprised given how weak she had been lately, but she looked better that day. She looked energetic, and I hadn't seen her like that in so long. She wanted to visit some of my favorite places from when I was a kid, which we hadn't visited in years. We started the day at the old ice cream shop downtown, with worn-out booths and the bell that jingled when you walked in. The same lady who had served us when I was little was still behind the counter. Her face was more wrinkled, and her hair had turned gray. She handed us 2 scoops of our favorite flavors. We sat in our usual booth by the window, and for a moment it felt like I was 10 years old again, laughing with Mom as the ice cream dripped down the cone. Afterward, we drove to the park where I used to play as a kid. The swings were still there, but they looked smaller now. We walked along the path, and as we passed the old playground, memories of summer days filled with laughter and scraped knees came rushing back. After a successful day, we drove home, and I helped her into the living room. She took a deep breath and told me that she had news to tell me. She said the doctors said that the cancer was more aggressive than they had initially thought, and she didn't have much time left. I felt my heart sink. All the joy I felt during our day was sucked out of me. I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. She squeezed my hand and told me she needed to ask me something important. She wanted me to forgive Jake. She knew what he had done, but she didn't want to leave this world with her sons at odds. She said she understood how angry and hurt I was, but she asked me to try, for her sake, to let go and find a way to forgive him. It was her last wish, and the one thing she wanted more than anything else. She then asked me to forgive her. I asked for what? I told her that she hadn't done anything wrong to me, and I saw the tears form in her eyes. She said that she needed to come clean about my father. Our dad left us when I was 5, and Jake was 3. I didn't understand why he left, but I've hated him ever since. She confessed that he didn't leave us because he didn't love us. He left because he was in deep trouble since he had a gambling problem, just like Jake. She kicked him out to protect us from the people who were after him. I asked her why she didn't tell us, and she said that she didn't want us to feel like he had chosen his addiction over us. She then said she also didn't want us to worry. She thought if she kept it from us, we would grow up without the pain of him being there, and now she could see she was wrong. The weight of her words sunk in, and I realized that Jake was just following in our dad's footsteps. He was trapped in the same cycle of addiction, and Mom tried to protect us from it, but it was too late now. A few days later, Mom's health took a turn for the worse. I rushed her to the hospital, but it was clear that there was nothing more they could do. She passed away peacefully, but the loss felt unbearable. At her funeral, I stood there filled with anger and sadness. Jake was let out of jail to attend, and when I saw him, all the emotions I'd been holding back came rushing out. I told him I couldn't believe he had done this to her. He stole from our dying mother. Jake looked hollow. His eyes were glossed over. He tried to apologize and explain that he learned his lesson, but I couldn't hear it. It hurt too bad. I told him I never wanted to see him again, and his face dropped even lower than before, but I didn't care. I turned my back on him and walked away. After the funeral, I decided to cut Jake out of my life for good. Weeks turned into months, and I tried to move on with my life, but it wasn't easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mom's face, the look of pain and betrayal when she found out what Jake had done. I tried to focus on anything that would keep my mind off what happened. I started seeing a therapist, hoping it will help me work through the anger and the pain. It helped a little, but there's still a part of me that couldn't let go of what Jake did. I couldn't forgive him, no matter how much I wanted to. I kept thinking about what Mom said, how Dad had the same problem, how she tried to protect us from it, but it didn't make it any easier to accept what happened. Jake tried to reach out to me a few times. He sent letters from jail. I read them, but I didn't respond. I knew he was sorry, but it didn't change what he did. Eventually, the letters stopped coming. I didn't know if he gave up on trying to make things right, or if he accepted that I didn't want anything to do with him. One day, I got a call from the warden at the prison where Jake was being held. He told me that Jake had been involved in a fight and that he was in the hospital. I hung up the phone, and for a long long time, I sat there staring at nothing. Part of me wanted to rush to the hospital to see if Jake was okay and make sure he wasn't hurt too badly, but the other part of me wanted to ignore it and pretend I never got that call. In the end, I did nothing. I didn't go to the hospital or call to check on him. One day, I got another letter in the mail. It was from Jake. I almost threw it away without reading it, but something stopped me. I opened it, and inside was a single sheet of paper with just a few words written on it. It wrote, "I'm sorry. I love you. Please forgive me." I stared at the words for a long time. I felt a lump in my throat. I folded the letter up and put it in a drawer. I decided it was time to forgive Jake. Not for him, but for me. I grabbed a pen and a sheet of paper from my desk and wrote him a letter. It wrote, "Dear Jake, I got your letter. I've thought a lot about what you wrote and decided to forgive you, but this is the last time you'll ever hear from me. I need to move on with my life, and that means letting go of the past and letting go of you. I want you to know that I've forgiven you, and I think Mom would want me to let it go. She asked me to forgive you, and even though it's taken me this long, I'm doing it now. I hope you can find a way to move on too, to live your life in a way that would make Mom proud. I don't want anything to do with you anymore, but I want you to know you've been forgiven. I hope you can find some peace in that. Take care of yourself. Goodbye." I sat back after I finished the letter. It was like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I folded the letter, slipped it into an envelope, and addressed it to Jake. As I sealed it, I knew that this was the end of the road for us. I mailed the letter the next day. After that, I tried to keep Jake out of my mind.